Sorry, it's been a while. I mean, sorry, not sorry. I'm busy. I'm very busy. I'm very busy, and the only time I get rest, I would like to rest. Reading is fine, but you know, setting the stream up and reading into a microphone is different from like laying in bed and reading, you know what I mean? Hello, everyone. Hey. Alright. Okay, it's gonna be an interesting read today. I'm gonna have to set up a timer for it because this book. Alright, today, what are we reading today? Today we are reading Natsume Sōseki. I know, I know, I know. You're probably like thinking, can we have another author already? But just want to let you know that this is the last book I have of Natsume Sōseki. Um, it's called The Miner, and I I can't find his book anymore. They took Books Depository from me, and that's the only place I could ever find Natsume Soseki books. I did find some locally, but it's only like his more well-known books like Kokoro or Sanshiro, all those like Bochan. All the other ones I could not find it. I still haven't been able to find Michikusa, which is like kind of his autobiographical book. Would love to have Michikusa, um, but I could not find it locally. And Books Depository, as I mentioned, is gone. A lot of regrets. A lot of regrets not buying more. I did buy like a last batch of his books, which includes the minor here. Um, but just I can't find his book. It's so difficult to find his books locally, and it sucks. It sucks that the Books Depository is gone, and I'm still mourning it's gone. Um, Mourning its death. Sorry. Um, Thanks Amazon. Basically. Um. All right. Today we are reading Natsume Soseki's Michikusa. Sorry, not. I wish. Today we are reading Kofu, the Miner. Um, as I mentioned, I wanted to read Kazuo Ishiguro's The Unconsoled first, actually, but I changed my mind because I just thought that the Unconsoled is also the last Ishiguro book I have. Right now I have read all of Ishiguro's books, like literally all of them. Um, and I just thought I'll leave Ishiguro last because, well, Ishiguro's still alive, so he's probably working on another novel right now. So there's still gonna be like future Ishiguro books to be read. Natsume Soseki's been dead over 100 years, so um, there will be no more Natsume Soseki's book unless I manage to find Michikusa, and Light and Dark, Meian. Um, but it's impossible. Basically, it's impossible to find any more of his books. But well, let's hope that I like fuck. I mean, it's not impossible to find. I can find it internationally, but imagine internationally you have to pay like in dollars, and then after that you have to pay for shipping. Well, books deposit shipping is free, and sometimes if the books are lost as in did not appear for 2 months, I can get a refund, and then one day it just appears in my post box. So, free books, yay! But at least Books Depository, I have a chance to own the book. I'm just not rich enough to spend like $50 on a book and then pay another $20 for shipping or whatever, to get the books to me. Well, maybe one day I'll get like I'll become super rich. I can like just throw money at international bookstores to get the books I want. But until then, this is the last Natsume Sōseki book I have, so I thought I'll just do it. I'll just finish it up and then just be sad about it for a while, um, and hope that Kazuo Ishiguro will write more books in the future. But um, I knew one day this would happen. I'll run out of Natsume Sōseki books and I'll run out of Ishiguro books to read, which is basically the most important two, wait, the the two most, oh my god, my English, the two most important writers in my on my channel. I read all of their books. They make up a huge portion of my channel. I know one day it's gonna happen, and it's happening now, and I'm a bit sad about it. But life's like that. Things end, so deal with it. Um, I know you're thinking, why are you talking about the future of the channel when there's hardly any content on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis even? Um, there's always a future, right? Unless I die. So until the day I die, there's still gonna be some content out of this channel. I'm still gonna read. So until the day I die, or I lost my voice for some reason and I can't read anymore, then yeah, um, then I won't be able to read anymore. Until then, the future of the channel is basically I don't have much planning for it, but I do have a lot of books in my bookshelf that I have not read. I'm those, but I'm like those people who buy books and then don't read them. I read most of them, but there's just a lot that it's on my shelf that I haven't read before. A lot of them are like classics, so not classics as in like Shakespeare or anything, but um, some really good books from the 90s or the 2000s. I don't know. I'll have to look into my bookshelf. But anyway, the future of channel is that once I run out of Ishiguro and I'll run out of Natsume Sōseki, I'll be reading some classic books. Um, I don't know about I don't know about reading new books because there's just something about um me with being unfamiliar with the writers and then reading them and then being disappointed that it's not the kind of reading that I like. Um, I don't know, but I'm still open to it, but not exactly the most open-minded person if I'm stuck with Ishiguro and Kazuo Ishiguro and Natsume Sōseki for like so many years. Anyways, enough babbling. I think it's been 10 minutes, 9 minutes. Yeah. So what I'm gonna do now is that the minor by Natsume Sōseki has no chapters. There's no chapters. There's no parts. I think there's no chapters and parts because I've flipped through the entire book and I don't see any pause. It's like a very long essay that just goes on forever. So I don't know when do I stop reading. So my strategy here today is that I will put up a timer for 2 hours, and then after that I let it run for 2 hours while I'm reading. I might take some tea break for like 10 seconds in between or a minute. I don't know. Maybe I need a bathroom break. Who knows? But I'm gonna read. I'm gonna read for 2 hours basically, and I'm gonna stop wherever the timer stops. It might stop at some awkward time, but I would make sure that I finish the paragraph at least, so that I wouldn't stop mid sentence. Obviously, so I'll try my best to make it not as like awkward as possible, but it is going to be awkward regardless because there's no chapters. There's no stopping point. I've glimpsed through the book and there's no pause. It just keeps going. Um, like me rambling right now, it just keeps going. Anyways, let's start. One sip of tea and we're gonna start reading. Okay. Okay. Lots of enough babbling. Enough babbling. Okay. Okay. Alright, let's go. Alright, today we are reading Natsume Sōseki's The Miner, Hofu. Been walking and walking through this band of pine trees. It's so long, longer than any band of pine trees I've ever saw in a picture. Can't tell if I'm making headway with only trees around. No point walking if the trees aren't going to do something, develop. Better to stay put and try to outstare a tree, see who laughs first. Left Tokyo at 9 last night, walked like a mad straight north. Sorry. Left Tokyo at 9 last night, walked like mad straight north. Worn out, sleepy, no place to stay, no money. Crawled onto a Kagura stage, in the dark for a nap. Hachiman Shrine, probably. Cold woke me up, still pretty dark. Push on without a break, but who feels like walking when there's no end to these damn trees? Legs weigh a ton. Every step is torture. Like having little iron hammers strapped to my calves. Kimono tail tucked up for hiking, legs bare. Anywhere else, I'll be set to run a race, but not with all these pine trees. Here's a tea stand. Through the reed blinds, I see a rusty kettle on a big clay stove. A bench in front sticks way out into the road. A few straw sandals hanging over it. A man in a kimono, a hanten or dotera or something, sitting there with his back to me. I'm moving past and peeking from the corner of my eye and wondering whether I should stop and rest or forget it when this fellow halfway between a hanten and a dotera spins around in my direction, smiling. His tobacco-blackened teeth showed between two fat lips. I start feeling queasy, but he turns serious. I see he's been enjoying a talk with the old lady in the tea stand and for no good reason swung around to the road where that smile of his landed smack on me. So serious. So he turns serious and I relax. I relax and then I feel queasy again. His face is serious, but he keeps it sitting there in a serious position. But damn if the whites of his eyes don't start creeping up my face. Mouth to nose, nose to forehead, over the visor and up to the crown of my cap. Then they start creeping down again. This time they skip the face, go to the chest, to the navel, and come to a stop. Wallet in there. 32 cents inside. Eyes lock in onto it right through my blue and white kimono. Still focused on the wallet, they cross my cotton sash and arrive at my crotch. Below that, only bare legs, and no amount of looking is going to find anything to see on them. They're just feeling a little heavier than usual. After a long, careful look at the heavy parts, the eyes finally arrive at the black marks my big toes have rubbed onto the platform of my geta. When I write it out like this, it sounds as if I was standing there, in the one spot for a long time practically inviting him to look me over, but that wasn't it at all. In fact, the second the whites of his eyes started moving, I was sure I wanted to get out of there. But knowing what I wanted to do wasn't enough, it seems. By the time I had my toes scrunched up and was ready to turn my geta, the whites of his eyes had stopped moving. I hate to say it, but he was fast. If you think it took a long time for his eyes to creep all over me like that, you're wrong. Sure, they were creeping, and they were calm as could be, but they were fast too. Damned fast. Here I was, trying to walk past this place, and all I could think was how strangely a pair of eyes can move. If only I could have managed to turn away before he had finished looking at me over. I was like somebody who announces that he's leaving a place after he has been ordered to get out. You feel like a fool. The other fellows got the upper hand. Once I started walking, I had a strange, angry feeling for the first 10 or 12 yards. But those 10 or 12 yards were all it took for the feeling to disappear and for my legs to grow heavy again. I've still got the same legs, don't I? And the same iron hammer strapped to them? Of course, I can't move quickly. Maybe I was born slow, but that can't be the reason those white eyes crawled all over me. When I think about it like this, my anger begins to seem pointless. Besides, I'm not in any position to let little things bother me. I've run away, and I'm never going home again. I can't even stay in Tokyo. I'm not planning to settle in the country either. They are after me. They'll catch me if I stop. Once my troubles start running around my brain, there's no place for enough out for me to relax. So I keep walking. But since I'm walking with no particular goal in mind, I feel as if a big blurry photograph is hanging in the air in front of my face. Everything's out of focus, and there's no telling when it might come clear. It stretches off ahead of me into infinity, and it will be there as long as I live. 50 years, 60, stretching out in front of me no matter how much I walk, no matter how much I run. Oh, hell. What's the difference? I'm not walking to get through this foggy stuff out there. I know damn well I could never get through it if I tried. I'm walking because I can't stay still. I thought I knew all this when I left Tokyo at 9 last night, but my nerves have been on edge ever since I started walking. Now, my legs are heavy, and these endless rows of pine trees are making me sick. Finally, though, it's not the legs of the pine trees that are bothering me. The ache is in my gut. It's a new kind of pain, one so bad I know I can't go on living a second longer if I don't keep walking, but I have no idea what I'm walking for. And that's not all. The more I walk, the deeper I can feel myself tunneling into this out of focus world with no escape. Behind me, I can see Tokyo where the sun shines, but it's already a part of a different life. As long as I'm in this world, I can never reach out and touch it. They are two separate levels of existence. But Tokyo is still there, warm and bright. I can see it so clearly that I want to call out to it from the shadows. Meanwhile, where my feet are going is a formless, endless blur, and all I can do for the rest of my life is wander into this enormous nothing, lost. I hate to think that this world of clouds is going to be out there, blocking the path ahead for the rest of my allotted span. Because what that means is that every time anxiety makes me take a step, I walk one step deeper into anxiety. Pursued by anxiety from behind, drawn on by anxiety ahead, I have to keep moving. But I can walk and walk and walk, and nothing is going to be solved. I'll go on walking through an anxiety that will stay unsettled as long as I live. I'll be better off if the clouds would grow darker every step of the way. Then I could keep going from darkness to deeper darkness. Before long, the world would be pitch black, and I wouldn't be able to see myself. Then everything would be fine. The road I'm traveling refuses to be of any help. It won't turn bright, but then it won't turn dark either. Always somewhere halfway between light and shadow. It remains enveloped in a fog of unsettled anxiety. A life like this is not worth living. I know, but I still cling to it. I want to go somewhere without people and live by myself. And if I can't do that, I might as well. Strange. The thought of the ultimate might as well didn't frighten me. In Tokyo, I had often been on the verge of committing something rash, but never without a throb of fear. Afterward, there would always be a rush of horror at what I had almost done, and I'll be glad I hadn't done it. But this time, there was no throb, no rush, no nothing. Probably because I was so full of anxiety that the throbs and rushes could have gone to hell for all I cared. And probably too, I knew in the back of my mind that the might as well was not about to happen at any moment. Maybe I figured there was nothing much to worry about. It could have been tomorrow, the next day, a week later, and if need be, I could have put it off indefinitely. No doubt I was half conscious of the fact that whether I was going to throw myself over Kegon Falls or into the crater of Mount Asama, I still had a long way to go. Who's going to start throbbing before he actually comes to the place where he plans to end it all? That's why I could let myself think about doing it. This out of focus world was agony, but as long as there's hope of escaping from it before the throb happens, there was still some point in dragging my heavy legs along. I had decided at least this much for myself, apparently. But I know this now only from having dissected my psychological state after the fact. At the same time, I was walking with only one thought in mind. Go into the dark. You have got to go into the dark. Now, it seems ridiculous. But there are times in life when we come to feel that the only comfort left us is to move ahead towards death. Of course, the death we are aiming for probably has to ask out of nowhere if I wanted a job. Oh wait, sorry. That was the wrong page. I'm sorry. Alright. Of course, death, the death we are aiming for, probably has to be pretty far away for us to feel this way. At least, I believe it would have to be. When it's too close, it can never be a comfort. That's just how death works. So here I was, walking along, my head filled with fog into the dark, got to go into the dark, when someone called me from behind. It's strange. Your soul can be ready to drift off into space, but another person calls you and you find it still anchored down somewhere. I turn around, not quite knowing why. One thing is certain though, I was not even conscious that this was in response to something. Only when I had turned did I realize that I hadn't gone 40 yards from the tea stand. And there is in the road in front of it was the cross between a Hanten and a Dotera, calling me and flashing his huge tobacco-stained grin. I hadn't talked to anyone since leaving Tokyo the night before. Never dreamed that a person would try speaking to me. I felt absolutely certain that I was unfit to be spoken to. Then it happened so suddenly. He was waving to me frantically and showing me this big snaggle-tooth grin. That the foggy feeling I turned around with cleared itself out, and my feet started moving in his direction almost before I was aware of it. Now, let me tell you. I didn't like anything about this man. His face, his clothes, his movements, especially when he gave me the once over with those white eyes of his, I could almost feel myself beginning to hate him. Less than 40 yards later, the feeling had disappeared, and I turned back to him with a sense of warmth instead. But don't ask me why. My only thought had been to go into the dark, which means that when I started walking back to the tea stand, I was moving away from my destination, away from the dark. Still, I was almost glad. I've had plenty of experiences since then, and I've run across contradictions like this everywhere. It's not just me. These days, I don't believe anymore in the existence of character. Novelists congratulate themselves on their creation of this kind of character or that kind of character, and readers pretend to talk knowingly about character, but all it amounts to is that the writers are enjoying themselves writing lies, and the readers are enjoying themselves reading lies. In fact, there is no such thing as character, something fixed and final. The real thing is something that novelists don't know how to write about. Or, if they tried, the end result would never be a novel. The real people are strangely difficult to make sense out of. Even a god would have his hands full trying. But maybe I'm jumping to conclusions, presuming that other people are a mess just because I put together in such a disorderly way. If so, I should apologize. Well, anyhow, I walked up to this dark blue doTERRA and he said to me, "Hello there, youngster," as if he had known me for years. He had his chin pulled in a little behind his collar and he was staring at me, somewhere up around my forehead. I planted my two brown legs a good distance from him and asked politely, "Yes, sir?" Ordinarily, I was not the sort who would favor someone like this doTERRA with a cordial reply, especially if I had been called a youngster. A grunt or a what was about as far as I would go. But at, but at that moment, I had the feeling that I and this doTERRA, with his horrid physiognomy, were human beings on an entirely equal footing. Nor certainly was I lowering myself to him in hopes of gaining some advantage. In return, he spoke to me as if he also saw us as equals. "Hey kid, want a job?" Until that moment, I had been resigning myself to having no other business in life and that then go into the dark. So when asked out of nowhere if I wanted a job, I didn't know what to say. I just stood there with my bare shanks planted in the earth, staring at this fellow with my mouth hanging open. "Hey kid, want a job? How about it? Everybody's got to work." By the time he repeated his question, I had grasped enough of the situation to be able to reply, "I don't mind." This was my answer. But the fact that my head had managed in a makeshift way, perhaps, to clear itself out enough for these three words to reach my mouth meant that it had passed through a certain, albeit simple, process, one that went something like this. I didn't know where I was going, but I was sure I wanted to go where there were no people. In spite of that, I had turned and started walking towards the doTERRA. So while I was walking, I couldn't help feeling a little disappointed in myself. Even the doTERRA was a human being after all. Here, someone supposedly heading away from human beings had been drawn back into the direction of a human being, which not only proved how great the gravitational pull of human beings, it also proved that I myself was so weak that I had already abandoned my own resolution. In short, I wanted to go into the dark, but I was actually doing it against my will. And if some entanglement came up to hold me back, I was probably ready to jump at the chance to stay in the real world. Fortunately, the doTERRA had provided me with the entanglement I needed, and so my feet simply turned around and went towards him. Let's say I shamefully betrayed my ultimate goal a little. If the first words out of if the first words out of the doTERRA's mouth had not been "want to job," but instead, "where you are going to do it, kid, the mountains or the fields," that goal I had been forgetting about would have come back to me with a start, and the thought of the dark place, the place without people. One moment, please. Sorry. Alright. Sorry. Where was I? Sorry. If the first words out of the doTERRA's mouth had not been want a job, but instead, where you are going to do it, kid, the mountains or the fields? That goal I had been forgetting about would have come back to me with a start, and the thought of the dark place, the place without people, would have filled me with horror, which only goes to show how my ties with the world had begun to reassert themselves the instant I began to retrace my steps. And the more he called to me and the more I moved in his direction, step by step, the more these ties seemed to have grown in strength, the moment I planted my bare shanks in the earth in front of him being the point at which they reached their highest intensity. It was at that moment he asked, "Want a job?" An invitation by means of which this scruffy doTERRA exploited my psychological state with great finesse. My initial response to this unexpected question seems to have been a blank stare. But by the time I snapped out of it, I had become a human being in the real world. As a human being in the real world, I had to eat, and to eat, I would have to work. I don't mind. The answer slipped from my mouth without the slightest difficulty. No, of course you don't. How could you? The expression on his face seemed to say. Strangely enough, I found this expression perfectly natural. I don't mind, but what kind of job? I added. You'll make plenty of money, I guarantee it. What do you say? He watched me expectantly, a gleeful grin on his face. A smile from the doTERRA was not about to charm any hearts, though. His was not a face made for smiling. The more he tried, the worse it looked. Still, I found that the smile strangely moving. Okay, I said, I'll give it a try. You will? Great. There's plenty of money in it for you. I don't care about money. Huh? His voice sounded strange when he said this. What kind of job it is? I'll tell you if you promise me that you will take it. You'll take it, kid, right? I don't want you backing down now. After I tell you what it is, you'll take it for sure, right? I'm planning to. This reply didn't come as easily as the first one. I more or less had to force it out. Apparently, I was willing to do anything within the reason, but still wanted to leave myself an escape, which is probably why I said I was planning to take it. I know it's a little strange for me to be writing about myself in this tentative way, as though I were someone not myself, but humans are such inconsistent beings that we can't say anything for certain about them, even when they are us. And when it comes to past events, it's even worse. There's no distinguishing between ourselves and other people. The best we can say is probably or apparently. I may be accused of irresponsibility for this, but there's no getting around it because it's true, which is why I intend to continue with this approach whenever anything doubtful comes up. The doTERRA understood my answer to mean that I had accepted his offer. Come on in, he said. Relax. We'll have some tea and I'll tell you all about it. That seemed fine with me. I stepped in and sat down on the bench next to the doTERRA. A woman in her 40s with a twisted mouth set up a cup of odd-smelling tea in front of me. The first sip made me hungry, or maybe I just suddenly realized that I was hungry. I was thinking about using the 32 sen in my wallet to buy something to eat when the doTERRA said, "Have a smoke?" and shoved a pack of Asahi sideways into my direction. Quite the gentleman. I didn't mind that he was offering me such cheap smokes, and I could live with the fact that the corner of the pack was torn, but it was grimy too, and squashed so badly that the cigarette inside must have been squeezed together into a single lump. The doTERRA had no sleeves pocket of on his doTERRA, and probably had to stuff his smoke into the pocket of his hagarake. No thanks, I said. With no show of disappointment, the doTERRA extricated a cigarette from the lump using his dirt-blackened fingernails. Just as I had thought, the cigarette was wrinkled and bent. Still, it didn't look torn, and when he puffed away at it, the smoke came from his nostrils. Strange to see it just barely managing to function as a cigarette. "How old are you, kid?" he asked. I had begun to feel that his tone became a touch more respectful when he was making promises about money, while at other times I was just a kid. He obviously had money on the brain. 19, I answered, which was true at that time. "Still young," said the woman with the twisted mouth. She was wiping a tray and had her back turned to us, so I couldn't see her expression at the moment. I had no idea whether she was talking to herself, or the doTERRA, or to me, but her words seemed to spark something in the doTERRA. "Sure," he exclaimed. 19 is young. It's the best time of life for work." He sounded as though he was determined to have me working. I said nothing and stepped away from the bench. There was a table for sweets out front. On it, a large platter stood beside a pastry box from which the edge had been broken off. A blue cloth lay on top the platter and not quite covering some round, deep-fried manju. I had approached the table with the thought of eating some of this, but on close inspection, I found the manju plate was swarming with flies. The sound of my footsteps as I come to a stop by the plate sent them scattering in all directions. But no sooner had I begun to recover from my initial shock and try examining the manju than the flies, as if signaling to each other that the storm had passed and it was safe now, zipped back down to the manju. The greasy yellow crust received a scattering of black spots. I was on the verge of reaching up for a pastry when the spot suddenly arranged itself into a network of lines, like the constellation on a starry night, and I held back, staring down at the plate. "Would you like a manju?" the woman asked. "They're fresh. Fried myself the day before yesterday." She had apparently finished wiping the tray and was standing now on the other side of the table. I looked up at her in surprise, and she, for some reason that was unclear to me, suddenly held out a thick hand over the plate. "Will you look at these flies?" she cried, moving her outstretched hand up and down once, and then 2 or 3 times from side to side. "Here, I'll get you some manju if you want." Before I could say anything, she took a wooden dish down from the shelf and used a long bamboo chopsticks, plopped 7 manjus onto it. I had better put them over there," she said, carrying the dish to the bench I had been sharing with the doTERRA and setting it down. All I could do was return to my place and sit down beside the wooden dish. The flies had already found it. Staring at the flies and the manju and the wooden dish, I said to the doTERRA, "Have one." This was not entirely in return for his earlier offer of a cigarette. I probably wanted to see too whether the doTERRA would eat this fly-covered manju that had been fried the day before yesterday. "Thanks," he said, and popped the topmost one into his mouth without the slightest hesitation. He seemed to find it pretty tasty, judging from the way his fat lips were working, so I decided to take a chance. I picked out one of the cleaner-looking manju from the bottom of my side of the pile and sank my teeth into it. Immediately, the flavor of the oil spread over my tongue, and the rancid feeling assaulted my taste buds. I took it calmly, though, given the situation, and when the filling in the crust and the oil had slipped smoothly into my stomach, oddly enough, my hand moved out towards the wooden dish again. By this time, the doTERRA had polished off a second one and was reaching for a third. His movements were much faster than mine, and he didn't talk when he ate. He seemed to have forgotten about the job that he was offering me and the big money. As a result, All 7 manjus disappeared in the space of 2 or 3 breaths, and that I had eaten only 2 of them. The doTERRA had finished off the other 5 in the wink of an eye. The thing A thing may be so dirty as to make us flinch, but once we take that first bite, we can go on eating without too much strain in our sensibilities. This truth was something I would come to experience firsthand at the mine. And now it sounds absurdly obvious, but at the time, while I was chewing on those manju, I was a little shocked to find myself wanting more. I was hungry. And besides, my companion was the doTERRA, watching him gobble down this sand-flecked manju. I began to feel a certain competitive urge and an awareness that sensibilities were not only useless, they could put you at a tremendous disadvantage. I ordered another serving from the woman. This time, as soon as the dish hit the bench, I popped one into my mouth. No have one or anything else for the doTERRA. And he did the same, without a word, least of all, thanks. Next I took one, then he took one, and the game went on like this until the 6th manju was gone, leaving only one. Fortunately, it was my turn now, and I grabbed it before he could put his hand out. Then I ordered another serving. You really pack it away, the doTERRA said. I hadn't thought of myself as packing it away, but now that he said so, I had to admit he was right. Of course, the doTERRA himself probably had a lot to do with it. The way he stimulated my appetite by tearing into the food that I myself didn't want to eat. To hear him say it, though I was packing it away entirely on my own, I felt a little like defending myself to him, but the appropriate words didn't come to mind. I just had this foggy notion that the doTERRA bore some of the responsibility, though. I had no very clear idea of where the responsibility lay, so I kept quiet. You're big on fried manju, huh? He said. He added, Sure, I like fried manju, some fried manju, but there was no way I could like sandy fly-covered manju that had been fried the day before yesterday. On the other hand, I couldn't exactly claim to hate something that I had just eaten 3 plates of. So I kept quiet this time too. Suddenly, the tea stand woman piped up. Our manju are famous. Everybody likes them. I could hardly believe my ears, unless she was trying to make a fool of me. So I kept quieter than ever. Unsurpassed flavor, offered the doTERRA. I couldn't tell if he meant it or was just soft soaping her. Anyway, to hell with the manju. I wanted to hear more about this job that he had for me. Excuse me, I began. But that business we were discussing earlier, it so happens that due to certain circumstances, it had become necessary for me to work in order to eat. I wonder if you could tell me what this job is that you were mentioning? The doTERRA stared for a while at the table with the sweets, then suddenly he turned his face to me and stuttered in again. You make lots of money, I'm telling you the truth. Lots of money. You've got to take this job. He was apparently still determined to make me rich. I took a moment to study his face, now turned full in my direction as its owner proceeded to tempt me. Beneath prominent cheekbones, the flesh of the face seems to melt away before it jutted out again at the jaw. The way the sunlight was shining in from the front of the shop, it brought out deep wrinkle that ran beneath his nose and arched downward on either side of his mouth. The sight of this face made the prospect of making money seem frightening somehow. I don't care about the money, but I will take the job. I'll do anything as long as it's sacred labor. Somewhere up around the cheekbones, a puzzled look flitted across the doTERRA's face. But when it was gone, he stretched that arching wrinkle to either side again, revealing his tobacco-stained teeth in all its glory. Then he laughed in his own special way. Looking back on it now, I would guess that the doTERRA simply didn't understand the phrase sacred labor. He was laughing out of pity that this sad creature who liked to say fancy things but who lacked the minimum qualifications in his eyes of a human being, the desire for money. Until only moments before, I had been determined to die, or at least go where there were no people. But having failed at that, to work in order to stay alive, money was simply not a factor at that point, not a factor at any point from me, from the time I was living off my parents in Tokyo. The whole idea of profit was one I found despicable. And I more or less believed that anywhere in Japan I would find only people who thought pretty much as I did. Which is why my only reaction whenever the doTERRA opened his mouth about money was to find it all very strange. He wasn't making me angry, of course. I was in no position to be angry. But it had never occurred to me that the promise of money could be the sweetest words of enticement one human being could offer another. And so the doTERRA laughed at me. And still the message didn't make it through. What a fool I was. When his special laugh began to subside, the doTERRA said, a touch more earnestly, "Tell me something, kid. Have you ever had a job?" "A job? I had run away from home just yesterday. The most work I had ever done was fencing and baseball. Not for one day of my life I had eaten food that I myself had paid for with the money that I had earned. No, I have never worked. But I'll have to from now on." That's what I thought. Say, if you never had a job, I guess you never made any money. Here was an observation that required no reply, and I offered none. From behind the table, the woman piped up, "If you're going to work, you might as well make money." As she spoke, she left her seat. "That's right," cried the doTERRA. "But where's the good jobs nowadays? You don't just go out and find them on the ground." He was beginning to hint at what an exceptional favor he was doing me. "Right," the woman muttered as though not entirely convinced, and she went out to the back. I think I expected her to add something to this strangely unnerving remark, and I half-consciously let my eyes follow her into the woods, where, still standing, she proceeded to urinate towards the base of a black pine tree. I quickly shifted my gaze towards the doTERRA, who went right on with the favors that he was doing me. "You're lucky you met me, kid. Look, what a tip I'm giving you, and I don't know you from the hole in a wall. Nobody else would let you in on such a terrific job for nothing." This was hardly worth replying to. I gave him an extremely formal "thank you" and left it at that. "Let me tell you about this job," he went on. I had nothing to say. "Let me tell you about this job. It's up at the copper mine. If I bring you there, you can get work right away. You can be a miner the same day. Pretty good, huh? What do you say? A miner?" I felt I was being pressed for a reply, but I was not exactly ready to be swept up in his enthusiasm. What was a miner, after all? A laborer who works in the tunnels of a mine. There are many different kinds of laborers in the world, but it seemed to me that the lowliest and the most cruelly used was the miner. Far from finding it pretty good that I could become a miner so easily, I viewed the prospect with a good deal of alarm. If someone had told me that there's a species still lower than the miner, I would have found the concept unimaginable, as if I had been told that there are many days left to the year after December 31st. I suspected that the doTERRA was saying this to me only because he assumed he could put anything over on one so young. He remained surprisingly serious, however. "So, as soon as you get there, you're a miner. And what an easy life! Before you know it, the money starts piling up and you can do what you like. They've got a bank up there, too. If you want to save, you can save." He turned to the woman. "What do you say? Isn't that something? You can be a miner right off." Still wearing the expression that she had on while she was doing her business standing up out back, the woman replied, "You said it. If he starts working in the mines now, he'll have so much money in 4 or 5 years that he won't know what to do with it. He's 19. Best working years. Have to make your bundle now or never. She smokes in little snatches, as if to herself. All but insisting that I become a miner. She seemed to be of the same opinion as the doTERRA. I had no objection, of course, nor did the prospect of not becoming a miner pose any problem for me. I had never been in my life in such an oddly passive mood. I suspect I would have gone along with anything anyone said to me at the time, no matter how outlandish. But why? I had just spent a year full of duty and desire and agony and my own wrongdoing that everything had suddenly burst and brought about an enormous collision as a result of which I had come running blindly this far. Nothing in my life before that day should have rendered me so passive, and yet undeniably I could not have found in myself the least spark of resistance to anybody, nor did I think of this as either strange or contradictory. I probably didn't have it in me to think about it at all. The only consistent thing about people is their bodies. And because our bodies stay the same, most of us are content to assume that our minds do too, that we go on from being the selves that we were, even when we do today the exact opposite of what we did yesterday. When the question of responsibility comes up and we were accused of breaking faith, why is it that none of us even thinks to reply, well, that's because my personality is nothing but memory fragments. Having experienced this contradiction any number of times, I know it's too much to ask, but still I seem to feel a tinge of responsibility, which leads me to the conclusion that people are put together in a tremendously convenient way so as to become victims of society. At the same time, having witnessed the irregular activity of my fragmented soul, I must conclude from a thoroughly objective, impartial view of the real me that there is nothing so unreliable as man. For anyone aware of his own soul, promises and solemn vows are an impossibility. Only the most uncivilized boor would try to hold another person to a promise. Take a close look at anyone fulfilling a promise, and you'll see that he's just doing it under pressure and trying not to let the pressure show. It's not his own free will. If I had realized this earlier, I might not have had to go through all the agony, hating people, running away from home to escape the pain. Or even supposing I had run away and come as far as this tea stand, if I had had the presence of mind to see that my behavior towards the doTERRA and the woman was totally different from anything I had ever done until the day before, and to compare the two calmly and objectively, I am sure I would have been able to handle situations a little more intelligently. But unfortunately, back then I lacked any capacity for self-analysis. I knew only that I was sad, I was angry, I was in pain, I was disgusted with myself, I was sorry for what I had done and sick of everything, but I couldn't cut myself off from humanity and I couldn't sit still. So I had started walking and had been snagged by the doTERRA and eaten a bunch of manju. Yesterday was yesterday, today was today, an hour ago was an hour ago, half an hour ago, half an hour from now was half an hour from now. I had no mind for anything but what was in my mind at that moment, and my soul, disconnected at the best of times, was floating looser than ever, till I could no longer be sure if it existed or not, in addition to which my recollection of the past eventful year had turned into a mass of phantom vapors that were filling the infinite spaces like the dream of a tragic play. As a result, where ordinarily I would have felt the need to assert myself to the limit, raising questions after question, what's so great about becoming a miner? Who says there's anything lower than a miner? Do you think all I care about is money? Is money the only thing that matters? I remained as passive as I could be, nor this was just a show of passivity. There was nothing inside me that wanted to resist. My only thought at the time it seems, was that I would be all right if I had a job to do. As long as I had to work, as long as this floating soul of mine could remain inside my body, however aimlessly, as long in other words, as I was not going to force the death of something that could not die on its own. These questions, what was above a minor and what below a minor? Was there money to be made or wasn't there? Were of no concerns to me, it appears. All I needed was the job. As long as I had that, it probably didn't matter to me that I was being fed a lot of hot air about its status or nature or results, or that these opinions ran counter to my own, or that the hot air was calculated to lure me into something, or that for me to swallow it could only raise serious doubts regarding my qualifications as an intelligent human being. At times like this, the most complex individual is reduced to utter simplicity. And besides, when I heard that I was about to become a minor, I felt strangely elated. First, I had run away from home, set for the possibility of dying. That had changed in the second stage to a desire to go where there were no people. Then, along had come to the third stage, a determination to work. But if I was going to work, something close to stage 2 would be better than an ordinary job. And better yet, would be something connected with stage 1. I had seemed to go from stage 1 through 2 to 3 almost before I knew it. But in fact, my changing mental state had been pushed along so that it moved with regret from one stage to the next, looking back fondly at each stage it had been forced to abandon. My third stage, determination to work, had not been so reckless as to shake off stage 2, nor had it moved so far from stage 1 as to sever all contact with it. If I could work in a place where there were no people and in a state of close to death, then I could carry out my final resolution while still, to some extent, satisfying my original goal. What was a miner after all? But a man in a mine. Someone who worked where the sun never shone, who, while in the real world, yet buried beneath it, whose only companion in the dark were lumps of ore and earth, and who never had to listen to the voices of the world of men. It was a gloomy life, no doubt, and that's what made it exactly right for me. There were lots of people in the world, but no one as perfectly suited to be a miner as I was. It would be my calling. Of course, I didn't have it worked out as clearly as this, but when I heard the word miner, the gloominess of it struck me, and the very gloominess made me glad. Recalling all this now, from my present vantage point, I can only believe I can only believe that they were the thoughts of someone else. So I said to the doTERRA, I intend to work as hard as I can. Do you think they'll let me become a miner? With a magnanimous air, the doTERRA replied, they are pretty tough about letting anybody be a miner right off, but if I put in a good word for you, it's a sure thing. If he says so, it must be true, I figured, keeping silent for a while. Then the tea woman piped up again. All you need is a word from Chozo over here. They'll make you a miner for sure. I now learned for the first time that the doTERRA's name was Chozo. I had a few occasions after that when we were getting on and off trains to call him by his name, but even now I am not certain how Chozo ought to be spelled. This was the man who grabbed me by the nose of the moment I ran away from home and turned me in a totally unexpected direction. The man, as it were, who contributed a great turning point to my life. How very odd that I should have learned his name by word of mouth but not know how to write it. So, anyhow, since Chozo and the tea woman both promised me I could become a miner, I figured it was true and replied, well then, I'll leave it up to you. Meanwhile, I had absolutely no idea where someone sitting in this tea stand would have to go or what steps he would have to take to become a miner. I didn't see any need to ask, however, since Chozo had pressed so hard that I had said I was leaving it up to him. I was sure that he would take care of it. All right then, Chozo said, vigorously lifting the tail of his dotera from the bench. Let's get going. Are you ready, kid? Don't forget your stuff. I had left home with nothing more than the clothes on my back. The only stuff that I could conceivably forget was my body. I'm not forgetting anything, I said, standing. But then the tea lady and I looked at each other. Ah, yes, the manju. I had forgotten to pay. Chozo was already halfway out through the reed blind, looking at the road with an unconcerned expression in his face. I pulled out my wallet and paid for 3 plates of manju from my 32 sen. While I was at it, I left a 5-cent tip. I can't recall how much I paid for the manju, but I remember the woman saying, "Stop by on your way back after you make all that money at the mine." I did eventually quit the mine, but I never had the occasion to stop by the tea stand again. I followed Chozo out to the old band of pine trees I was so sick of, trudging down its single path in the ankle-deep dust. And though it had seemed endless before, I was surprised how quickly we got through this time. The pines gave way at some point, and we found ourselves at the edge of what appeared to be one of those shabby old post towns on the Itabashi Highway. It seemed all the more like the Itabashi Highway when a rickety horse-drawn omnibus passed by. Walking a step ahead of me, Chozo turned and asked, "Want to take the omnibus, kid?" "I don't mind," I said. "Want to forget the omnibus?" he asked. "I don't mind," I said. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't care," I said. By that time, the omnibus was gone. "All right," Chozo said. "Let's walk." And he started walking. So I started walking. Ahead, the dust raised by the omnibus filtered into the morning sun, giving the road a cloudy yellow look. Soon, the number of passersby began to increase, and the town itself became a little bit more presentable. We came to a spot almost as lively as Kagurazaka in the Ushigome district of Tokyo. In fact, the shops and the people and their clothing looked exactly like the same as the ones in Tokyo. There was hardly anybody like Chozo here. I asked Chozo, "What's the name of this place?" "What? You don't know?" he said with a surprised look, but he told me readily enough, without laughing at me. In this way I learned the name of the town, though I'm not going to mention it here. Apparently, quite puzzled that I didn't know the name of this bustling place, Chozo asked, "Where are you from, kid? Where were you born?" Now that I came to think of it, for someone who was supposed to be introducing me to an employer, it was a little too negligent of Chozo never to have asked me about my past or my background. Later, I came to realize that he had absolutely no interest in such things. When he asked me where I was born, it was strictly out of momentary curiosity aroused in him by my ignorance. As evidence of this, when I answered Tokyo, his only response was, "Oh," and he turned into a side street, practically dragging me in after him. The fact is, I came from a rather prominent family. While it may appear that I had run away from home because things had become too complicated for me, I had not taken this rash step merely to spite my parents. I had come to hate being at the home because of a sort of disgust I was feeling for people in general, and once I started feeling that way, I couldn't stand the sight of my relatives, my parents, anybody. At one point, I realized that I was doing what I was doing and tried to fight it, but by then it was too late. The more I struggled, the worse it became, until finally the cork popped and all the reserve of patience I had tried so hard to build were lost. I left home the very night. If we look into the origins of the matter, the first thing we find is a girl. Next to her is another girl. Around the girls are their parents, then relatives, and surrounding them are all people of society. But girl number one looks at me and started changing. Now she's round, now she's square. And when she changes, I have to change. Now I'm round, now I'm square. But vows I was born to with girl number two means I shouldn't be doing this with girl number one. As young as I am, I know what is happening, but the guiltier I feel, the more I go on turning round and then square. Finally, the change ceases to be merely one form and becomes one of internal structure as well. And girl number two is watching this with eyes full of bitterness. The parents are watching and the relatives too. And all those people out there in society can see what is going on. My heart is stretching and shrinking and bending and twisting. And I try my best to cover it up, but girl number one won't leave me alone. She keeps stretching and shrinking and letting me see, and there's no way I can hide what I'm doing. Parents find out, and the relatives find out. They say I'm the villain. Of course, I've never considered myself a hero in all this, but the more I sound them out, the more I realize that what they mean by villain and what I mean by villain are two different things. I try to explain myself, but they won't listen. I'm beginning to feel especially put out that my own parents won't believe me when it occurs to me that if I stay by girl number one, there's no telling what could happen. I may well become the villain they say I am and never be able to explain. But still, I can't tear myself away from her. Every day I feel increasingly guilty towards girl number two. Every day these conflicting emotions come rushing at me from all directions, and I'm the maypole in the middle. If I pull on this ribbon, it tangles that one. If I loosen that one, this one tightens up. There's no way I can straighten out all the lines jumbled together in my head. I try twisting and twiddling with them so much I can't stand my own cleverness, but the result is always the same. And then it hits me. Since I'm the one who's suffering, I'm the only one who can put a stop to it. Until now, I've been counting on somebody else to come up with a solution that will work for me. It's as though I've met someone on the road and I'm trying to figure out a way to have him walk around me in the mud while I stand my ground. I've been presenting him with the impossible reasons why I should stay where I am, and he should be the one to move. There's no point letting your reflection bother you as long as you're standing in the mirror. If there's no way you can move the mirror called the code of society, then the most sensible thing is to step away from it. And so, I decided to blow myself out of this convoluted relationship like a puff of smoke. The only way to turn myself into smoke, however, was to commit suicide. I tried it once or twice, but every time I was on the verge of killing myself, I would become too frightened to go through it. Finally, I realized that suicide is not something that you become better at. You become better at with practice. If I couldn't kill myself if I couldn't kill myself all at once, then I could let myself die a natural death. But living the comfortable life of one who, as I said earlier, comes from the fairly prosperous background, there was not much hope of my dying if I simply stayed at home. I would have to run away. Sometimes it seemed to me that I could never forget these relationships even if I ran away. Sometimes it seemed to me that I could forget them. Finally, I concluded that I would never know unless I tried. Even if the agony comes from running with me, that was something that concerned me alone. Those I left behind could only be helped by my disappearance. Another thing to keep in mind was that I could not go on running forever. I would run because I simply couldn't die right away, but running would be a step in the right direction. The thing to do was to give it a try, and if it looked as though I was going to be pursued and tortured by the past, then it was still not too late to begin making plans to let myself die naturally. And if after that it became clear that nothing was going to work, then at last the time would have come for me to perform my final act of suicide. I know what a bore this makes me when I write it out like this, but it can't be helped because these are the bare facts. And it's precisely because I am writing it out that I'm so boring. I'm sure that if I were to set down my foggy brain determination in all its fogginess, then even I would be fully qualified to become the protagonist of a novel. Or even if it not, if I wrote a sensational account of everything that actually happened, the two girls in a situation that changed daily, my worries, my agony, my parents' opinions, my relatives' advice, I am sure I could make a very entertaining newspaper novel. But I have neither the pen nor the time for such things, so I forget about that and just tell about the most important thing, my experience as a miner. Well, anyhow, I had run away with all this business behind me, and I was ready to be buried alive, or to bury myself alive. But when it came to that but when it came to something like my parents' names or my own past history, or as desperate as I was, I still didn't want to talk about these things to Chozo. And it wasn't only Chozo I didn't want to talk about them to any human being, including myself if possible. That's how miserable and beaten down I was feeling. And so, although I found it strange that as a job referee, Chozo didn't quite quiz me on my background, I was inwardly very pleased. I might also point out that at the time of my life, I had not had much practice in the art of lying, and I still thought that it was a great evil to conceal the truth. Which means that if he had quizzed me, I am not sure what I would have done. I followed Chozo down the side street, but before we had passed a block or two of houses, the building suddenly became less densely packed, and I caught glimpses of rice paddies between them. I was just thinking that all this town's bustles were stretched thinly along either side of Main Street when Chozo whipped me around and another corner that led me into yet another lively spot. The street dead end at a railroad. I now saw that the procedure for becoming a miner required me to take the train. I had I had been imagining that the mine had a branch all office or some such thing in this town, that after being taken there I would be escorted to the mine by an official. A few yards from the station I called out to Chozo, who was still ahead of me. Chozo, do I take a train? This was the first time I had called him by his name. He turned somewhat in my direction but gave no sign that he found it unusual to have a complete stranger calling him by his first name. Right, he said, and entered the station. I stood at the station entrance thinking, this fellow planned to board the train with me and bring me to the place. If so, he was being a little too kind. There was something fishy about the way he was taking such good care of me. He had he had never seen me before in his life. Maybe he was some kind of con man. It had taken long enough for these suspicions to hit me, but once they did, I started to have second thoughts about boarding the train. It occurred to me that I probably ought to get out of there fast, and I turned my feet, which until then had been pointing towards the platform, back out towards the street. For a while, I just stood there, staring at the red curtain of the tea stand in front of the station, seemingly unable to work up to resolve to start walking, when suddenly a great bellow came from a distance to put a stop at such any plans. When I heard this voice, I realized that it belonged to Chozo. It was the voice I had been hearing since the pine grove. I turned to find Chozo's head poking up at an angle in the distance, bobbing up and down, his eyes looking hard at me. The rest of him seemed to be hidden behind the wall of public urinal. I walked towards the face, thinking I might as well respond to his call. You ought to take care of business before we get on the train, kid, Chozo said. I really didn't have to, but he kept insisting, so I stood next to him. And if I may broach an unwholesome subject, urinated? At the moment, I thought my thoughts changed again. I don't own anything but my body. With neither property nor honor to be robbed or cheated of, I'm obviously an unpromising commodity. To be frightened of Chozo means I'm confusing what I am today with what I was till yesterday, which is like worrying about having your pay attached after you lost your job. Chozo surely had no education, but you don't need an education to look at someone like me and know right off there's nothing here to be swindled. Maybe he really is planning to take me to the mine and collect some kind of commission. That's okay. I'll just have to give him a certain percentage of my pay and so forth. That's what I was thinking as I stood at the urinal. While the time involved was brief enough, it took me all the weighing and cogitating to reach this puny conclusion that I was still unable, in spite of these efforts, to grasp the simple fact that Chozo was, in the pure sense of the word, a procurer, a procurer of laborers for mines, was due entirely to my being 19 years old. Being young is a real disadvantage. I had come to this close to realizing that Chozo was a procurer, and still I was treating him with an absurd level of deference that I thought I owed him for the kindness that he might be granting me purely out of the goodness of his heart. What a laugh! But in fact, when we had wandered from the urinal to the entrance of the third-class waiting room, I turned to Chozo with some degree of formality and said, in all seriousness, "It was very kind of you to bring me this far, and I really can't ask you to do any more." Instead of replying, Chozo looked at me with an odd expression which made me wonder if I had chosen my words poorly in thanking him, so I tried again. "You have been tremendously helpful and I want to thank you," I said, nodding repeatedly. "But I can take care of myself from here on out. Please don't bother about me." "Take care of yourself?" Chozo said. "You're kidding." "No, really," I said. "What makes you think so?" I didn't know how to respond to this, but I said with some hesitation, "Oh, well, you can give me the directions and I can go there, and if I mention your name, they'll take care of me." "Look, kid, you don't know what you're talking about. They're not going to make you a miner just because you know my name. It's not that easy." "But I really hate to bother you." "Oh, don't worry about me," Chozo said with a laugh. "I don't mind taking you there. You know what they say, if you even rub sleeves with somebody, karma did it." Finally, I said, "I can't thank you enough," and left it at that. We were sitting together at a bench in the waiting room, and the station gradually began to fill with people. Most of them were country types. One man not only was wearing the kind of hanten dotera that Chozo had on, he was even carrying a shoulder pole. On the other hand, there was a very Tokyo-looking merchant with a glossy apron and an oddly dented felt hat. After a while, the bench was surrounded by the noise of footsteps and voices, and suddenly the ticket window clattered open. The more impatient people jumped to their feet and crowded in front of the iron mesh, but Chozo was as cool as ever. With one of his bent asahis dangling from his thick lips, he turned about 2/3 of the way towards me and asked, "Hey kid, do you have the ticket money?" Again, this will sound as if I'm advertising my own immaturity, but until that moment the thought of the fare had not crossed my mind. It was the height of stupidity for me to be thinking, on the other hand, well, I guess I'll be getting on the train, and never to have wondered on the other, how much will it cost? Or even, do I have to pay anything? I freely admit to this stupidity, but the fact is that until I heard Chozo's question, I have been feeling as unconcerned as if I thought I could ride for free. I'm not sure why this was so, but I suppose that deep down I had begun to feel strangely dependent on Chozo, as though if I stuck with him, he would take care of everything. Of course, I myself was unaware of such any thoughts. Even now, I'm not anxious to admit this about myself, but unless I was feeling some sense of security, I could never, for all my youth and stupidity, have come to a railroad station and failed to have the slightest inkling that there was a fare to be paid. In spite of which I had said to Chozo that I no longer needed his help, and that I could go on from here alone. What could I have been thinking? Having encountered situations like this on several occasions since then, I have formulated a theory. Just as illnesses have an incubation period, there is an incubation period for our thoughts and feelings. Although we possess these thoughts and are controlled by these feelings during the incubation period, we remain unaware of them. And if nothing happens in the outer world, To bring them to the surface of consciousness, we go on being controlled by these thoughts and feelings for the rest of our lives, insisting all the while that we have never been influenced by them. We try to prove our points through actions and words that negate the thoughts and feelings, but an outsider's view of our actions reveals the contradiction. Sometimes we are amazed to see the contradictions ourselves. Sometimes, without seeing it, we experience tremendous pain. My own suffering at the hands of the girl I mentioned earlier was caused, ultimately, by my inability to perceive what was incubating inside of me. If only we could inject some powerful medicine that would kill off these unknowable creatures before they could violate our hearts, then what contradictions, what misfortunes mankind would be spared. But things do not work out as we would wish them to, and that's too bad for all of us. And so Chozo asked me if I had when Chozo asked me if I had the ticket money, I was shocked and flustered. After the manju and the tip, there was nothing left of my 32 sen. I didn't even have the train fare, and yet I had promised to become a miner as if I knew what I was doing. When I realized what a phony that made me, I felt my cheeks flush. Looking back, I'm touched by my own innocence. These days, somebody could press me to repay my debts in a crowded car, and while I might be annoyed, I certainly wouldn't blush. To think I could have wasted the sacred scarlet of shame on a lowly procurer like Chozo, today it would be out of question. For some reason, I wanted to tell Chozo that I did have the fare. Of course, I didn't actually have it, but I couldn't lie and say I did. If I could have lied and gotten away with it, I suppose I would have, but if I had lied at that point, only moments before buying the ticket, the truth would have emerged almost immediately. Still, the thought of saying I didn't have it was too painful. I was a child, or if not exactly a child, I was a slightly grown up child with adult passions and agonies, and perhaps the tiniest smattering of common sense, which made things all the more complicated. I found myself unable to reply either that I had it or I didn't have it. I've got a little, I said. It wouldn't have been so bad if my answer had bounced back at him like an echo without delay, but my cheeks had just reddened for the undeserving recipient, and I spoke with extreme hesitancy. What a fool. What do you mean a little? How much you have got, kid? Chozo was moved neither by my red cheeks nor by my hesitancy. He obviously just wanted to know how much I had. Unfortunately, not even I knew the answer to that. But one thing was for sure. After having paid for 3 plates of manju and leaving 5 cent tip from a total of 32 cent, there was not a whole lot left. Or if there was something, it was the same as nothing. Very little. I doubt if I had enough. I answered honestly. He took this more calmly than I expected. That's okay. I'll make up the difference to show me how much you got. I would have been embarrassed to be seen counting coppers, but I didn't want to be suspecting of trying to hide what I had. I took my wallet out and handed it to Chozo, money and all. Now, this was an extremely fine alligator wallet, the high price of which had become the suspect of serious lecture by my father, who had made such an extravagant purchase for me. Chozo looked at it for a moment after it had passed from my hand to his, said only, this wasn't cheap, and stuck it onto the pocket of his haragake without checking the contents. I was relieved that he didn't count the money, but then he left the bench and hurried over to the ticket window after pointedly cautioning me. Now, I want you to stay right here while I go buy the ticket. Don't get lost or you won't be able to become a miner. As I watched, he plunged into the crowd, waiting his turn without giving me a second glance. From the time we left the pine grove until now, Chozo had been close by my side, or the one time he did leave me for a moment, he actually stuck his head out of the public toilet and called me over. Once he had my wallet and was buying ticket though, it seemed as if he had forgotten all about me. Probably he had no chance to look at my way because there were so many people about. I, meanwhile, never took my eyes off his back, and I could feel a strange sort of nervousness mount as from a distant vantage point I watched him moving closer to and closer to the ticket window each time a person ahead of him in line bought tickets. The wallet was impressive enough from the outside, but the inside was only copper. Chozo was going to be shocked when he opened it and found how little I had. I felt bad about that, and I was still worrying needlessly about how much he was going to have to add to my money when Chozo came back wearing his usual expression. Here, this is yours, he said, handing me a red third-class ticket, but offering not a word as to what he had to pay for it out of his own pocket. Feeling awkward about all this, I only said, "Thank you," and did not bother to mention the money or the wallet. Chozo never said anything about the wallet either. In fact, I had given it to him. Finally, the two of us boarded the train. Nothing much happened on the train, except that I felt sick and changed my seat once when a past-eyed man covered with boils and pockmarks sat next to me. In retrospect, this seems pretty ridiculous. You wouldn't expect someone who had run away from home and resolved to descend to the rank of the miners to be put off by most things, but still, I didn't want to sit close to anything so repulsive. At that rate, I suppose I would have fled from a man with a pus in his eyes right down to the day before I committed suicide. But did I handle everything so fastidiously? No, of course not, which is what bothers me. When I met Chozo and the tea lady, for example, I took in everything they said without a peep. Not a hint of my usual argumentative, self-assertive behavior. Of course, it would be reasonable to try to account for this by reference to the fact that I was starving at the time. The hunger was surely not the whole explanation. Any way you look at it, it's a contradiction. Here, I go with the contradictions again. Never mind. I have a habit of recalling the adventures I experienced back then whenever I had a few spare moments. It was the most colorful period of my life. Each time I bring back those images to savor, I wield my scalpel mercilessly. You can do this with all memories, in an attempt to chop up my own mental processes and examine every little piece. The results, however, are always the same. I don't understand them. Now, don't tell me I have just forgotten because it had happened so long ago. I'll never have such an intense experience again in my lifetime. And especially don't tell me that the lines are tangled because those were the frantic acts of confused adolescents. The acts themselves were confused and misguided, but the only way to understand the processes leading to those misguided acts is to examine them calmly with the brain that I have today. It's precisely because I can now look at my trip to the mind as an old dream that I am able to describe it for other people with even this degree of clarity. I'm not saying that I have the courage to write down everything that happened because the passion had faded. I could never have managed to put down even this much on paper if I didn't have the detachment to drag the old me out to where the present me can see it and study every wart and pimple. Most people imagine that the most accurate account of an experience would be the one written at the time and place, but this is a mistake. Driven by the passions of the moment, a description of the immediate situation tends to convey preposterous misconceptions. Take, for example, my trip to the mine. If I had kept a diary, say, of my feelings just as they were at that moment, I'm sure the results would have been an infantile, affected thing full of lies. Certainly, nothing I could have presented to the people like this and asked them to read. When I fled across the aisle from the perils of the past-eyed man, Chozo glanced at me and at the man, but he stayed in his seat. I was enormously impressed at how much more robust Chozo's sensibilities were than my own. My admiration for him faded somewhat when he actually began talking with a man as calm and cool as could be. "Back to the mine?" the past-eyed man asked. "Yep, got another one." "That him?" asked the past-eyed man, glancing in my direction. Chozo looked as if he were about to say something, but his eyes met mine and he closed his thick lips, turning away. The past-eyed man turned away with him and said, Gonna make another bundle, huh?" As soon as I heard this, I stuck my head out the window and let go with a gulp of spit, but it flew back and hit me in the face. I was feeling pretty rotten. There were two men in the seat opposite me. They had a conversation going. Suppose a robber comes in, sneaks in? No, no, he breaks down the door and he starts threatening them with sword or something. Alright, then what? Now suppose the owner gave him counterfeit money to get rid of him. Alright, and then? Then afterward, the robber notices that it's counterfeit and starts telling everybody the owner passes counterfeit money. Tell me, Tsune, what do you think? Which one is more to be blamed? Which what? Which man? The owner or the robber? That's a tough one. The second man was struggling with this conundrum when I found myself growing sleepy. I laid my head on the windowsill and drifted off. The minute you go to sleep, time ceases to exist. Sleep is the best medicine for anyone to whom the passage of time is a source of pain. Death is probably just as good, but dying is a lot more difficult than it seems. The ordinary person uses sleep as a handy substitute for death. People who practice judo often have their companions choke them. They spend 5 minutes or more of some lazy summer day lying dead in the dojo until their friends breathe life back into them and they wake up feeling so good, as if they have been reborn, or so they tell me. I was always too worried about that I might actually die to risk this heroic cure. Sleep may not be as effective, but it avoids the danger that you might not return to life. For anyone with worries, for anyone deep in anguish or unbearable pain, for anyone about to become a miner as a step on the road to self-destruction, sleep is the greatest gift of nature. By sheer chance, this gift of nature now settled itself on my head. Before I could express my thanks for it, I drifted off, utterly obliterating time, whose passage one has the choice but to be aware of as long as one lives. But then I woke up. I suppose what happened was that since I had fallen asleep while the train was moving, the sleep lost its rhythm and flew off somewhere when the train came to a stop. Apparently, while sleeping, I am able to forget the passage of time and I go on reacting to the movement through space. Which means that if I really want to forget my anguish, I'm really just going to have to die. No doubt, though, the minute the anguish disappears, I will want to come to life again. The ideal thing for me, to be quite honest, would be to live and die over and over. This looks like some kind of stupid joke when I set it down on paper, but I'm not trying to be facetious. I mean it in all seriousness. This ideal of mine is not something I struck on now just for fun, as an afterthought while recalling the past. It actually came to me like this when the train stopped and I woke up. It may seem comical because the feeling itself was ridiculous, but all I can do is set down what I honestly felt. The closer this feeling comes to comedy, the sorrier I felt for myself back then, because I realized all the more vividly what a sad state I was in if I could seriously cherish a hope so divorced from common sense. When I woke up, I found the train had stopped. Before I thought to myself, the train stopped, the thought occurred to me, I'm on a train. No sooner had that first thought crossed my mind than I said to myself, I'm with Chozo. I'm going to be a miner. I didn't have to fare. I ran away from home, and so on and so forth. Maybe 12 or 13 such thoughts clumping together and popping out of the depth of my mind all at once. How can I describe the speed with which this happened? Should I say it was beyond description? Like a flash of lightning? In any case, it happened with terrifying swiftness. I later heard that some drowning people have seen their whole life flash before their eyes, complete in every detail, and judging from my own experience at that moment, I would have to conclude that such stories were true. This is how swiftly I have become conscious of my position and condition in the real world. Simultaneously with the return of consciousness came a feeling of disgust. Actually, disgust can't fully describe what I was feeling, but I'll settle for it since there's no other words that will do the job. Those who have experienced the feeling will know immediately what I'm talking about, and those who haven't should count themselves lucky. It's nothing that you would ever want to learn. Before long, two or three people in the car stood up. Two or three other people entered the car from the outside. What with those who were looking for seats and those who were checking for things they might have left behind, plus the others with no particular business who were shifting in their seats, sticking their heads out of the window or yawning. The entire world seemed to be crumbling into a state of unrest, and I became aware that everything in my immediate vicinity that had begun to move. With the awareness came the realization that I was different from ordinary people. I was an outsider whose mood did not become swept up in the movement, even when the people around me was moving. I felt like someone I felt like some ghost who had strayed in from the world beyond. My sleeves might brush theirs, or my knees touch those who were opposite me, but our souls remained utterly separate. Until this moment, I had begun one way or another to keep up in tune with the normal run of men, but the second the train stopped, the world became bright and ascending, while I became dark and descending, and all hope was lost for contact between the two. At the thought, I felt myself shriveling like a pricked balloon, and my chest and back pressed inert together until they were as thin as a piece of paper. Alone, my soul suddenly plunged down through the surface of the earth. I was defeated, overwhelmed, and dizzying feeling of shame and remorse. At this point, Chozo stood and approached me. "Hey kid," he said. "Still asleep? We get off here." Oh, I thought. So that's what's happening. And I stood up. Funny, funny, your soul can be halfway through the earth, and as long as the blood is still coursing through your veins when you call it, it comes back. If things go a little too far, though, the soul won't return to the body as ordered. When I was in the shipwreck off Taiwan some years later, for example, my soul pretty much nearly gave up on me, which was quite an ordeal. No matter how bad the situation, there's always worse. You should never relax because you think you have come to the end of the line. This was a brand new feeling for me at the time, though, and a bitter experience. Sniffing after the tail of Chozo's doTERRA, I passed through the wicket and out to the main street of a large town. It was the usual long, straight road you find in old post towns, but it was surprisingly broad, and it was so straight that it seemed to clear the mind. Standing in the middle of this wide street, I saw all the way down to the far end of the town, and as I did so, I was struck with an odd kind of feeling. Since this was another of those feelings that I was experiencing for the first time in my life, I will take the moment to set it down here. I had just come out of the street, restored to a more or less human view of the world after having barely succeeded in calling back my soul, which had nearly escaped when the bottoms of my lungs fell out. The soul had finally found its way into my lungs with my most recent inhalation, but it was still noticeably wobbly and far from settled in. So I was here in the world. I was the one who had just left the train, come out of the station, and was standing in the middle of the street. My soul possessed only the most blurry of consciousness, as if it were reluctantly performing at a minimum capacity, and could not fully grasp the fact that these functions were its professional responsibilities, accepted in all solemnity. Dizzy and half conscious, I opened my sunken, staring eye, bereft as they were now of interest in anything. Then my field of vision, which until the moment had been crammed into a boxy train car, suddenly leaped 1,000 yards ahead down the length of the far-stretching road. And although my eyes came to a rest at its end on a mountain fairly dripping with lush greenery, the mountain was too far away to feel an obstruction. Instead, it absorbed my leaden gaze into its green depth, which is now I came to have this odd feeling I mentioned. First of all, the flat, perfectly straight road had a brazen simplicity about it, as though it had been built to fit the phrase of the Book of Songs. The great road was like a whetstone, or more simply stated, it doesn't confuse the eye. Here, come with me, don't worry. It seems to have beckoned. There's no need for hesitation or reserve. And because it does say come with me, if you stick with it, you can go on forever. The eyes don't even want to turn down side streets for some strange reason. The farther the road continues straight ahead, the more the eyes have to move straight ahead if they are to avoid constraint and discomfort. I firmly believe that the great ribbon of highway has taken its form parallel to the free movement of the eyes, and in looking at the row of houses on either side, some of which are tiled roof and others thatched, and I make no distinction between the two, and the farther I look, the lower and lower the roofs drop, and the hundreds of houses stretch on forever, moving away at an angle and in all perfect alignment, as though there were a wire has been passed through them from the far end to the near in order to regularize the slope. The farther away they stretch, the nearer they come to the ground. The two-story buildings to either side of where I stand, I recall them as inns, are tall enough so that I have to look up at them. But peering through to the end of the town, the eaves were there look low enough to fit between two fingers. The houses are not entirely uniform, to be sure. A few have shops curtains fluttering in the breeze, one a large clam drawn to the front shoji door. But when you follow the lines of the eaves into the distance, a couple of miles came leaping into the eyes in a half second, and so brilliantly clear is the scene. As I have already said, my soul was completely hungover, and in that state, with no warning, the second I came out of the station, it ran smack up against this brilliantly clear scene, one that would have been clear to a blind man. Of course, there was no way it could have avoided a shock, and that's just what it got. But a little time had to go by before it could become an the inertia of shaky, wobbling, hang-back condition. Now, this odd sort of feeling I have described was something that occurred in the critical interval between the moment I sensed brilliant clarity of the scene and shortly afterward the moment my soul flopped over in its sleep. The clear, expansive scene, so totally unsuited to my emotional state, was a wonderfully lively thing, but no amount of brightness or expansiveness could prevent it from becoming a mere fact of reality once my startled soul began to involve itself seriously with the outer world. Even the holiest of lights must lose some of its glory when it is reduced to a function of real world. Because my soul had been in an unusual state, because it had been able to perceive the bright outer world in all its brightness, but had not been functioning acutely enough to attain the consciousness that this was actually happening. I had had the good fortune to see this straight road and these straight eaves as a brilliant dream with the impact of reality. As a result, I felt exactly as I would have in encountering a phantasm from the world beyond, with a degree of clarity visible only in this world and with an accompanying sense of exhilaration. True, I was standing in a road. The road was tremendously long and straight. If I wanted to, I could walk its entire length and pass through the town, and if I wanted to touch the houses on either side, I could reach out and touch them. If I wanted to climb to the second story, I could climb to a second story. I knew full well that all these things were possible, but I had lost track of the concept of their being possible, and I stood there simply receiving an acute sense impression through the eyes. I'm no scholar, and have no idea what you call this kind of feeling. Not knowing what to name it, I have ended up describing it at such lamentable length. I suppose I'll be laughed at by people with an academic background who see this and think, is that all? But it can't be helped. Since then, I have experienced feelings similar to this on several occasions, but never again with such intensity. I have gone to the trouble of writing this down in the hope that the information might possibly be of use to someone. As soon as it came to me, though, the feeling was gone. I noticed that the sun was on its way down, judging from the angle of the light. This was early summer, when the days are longer. The hour was probably some time after 4 o'clock, probably not yet 5. The weather was not as good as I had thought, possibly because this place was near the mountains, but I couldn't exactly have called it bad, since the sun was shining. Noting the sun, which was striking the long street at an angle, I concluded that that must be the west. I knew that I had kept myself running straight north from Tokyo, and I had lost all sense of directions by the time I left the train. If we follow the road north through the town, we'll come to the mountain, I thought. And if I'm right about the directions here, the mountain too is north, so Chozo and I are still going to be headed north. The mountains seemed to be pretty far away, and it was by no means small. Its color was blue, and the brightness of the side of the sun was shining gave the shaded side a blackish hue within the blue. Of course, this might have been owing owing to the abundance. Of course, this might have been owing to the abundance of cedars and cypress rather than to the angle of the sun. In any case, it was obviously dense and deep. When I shifted my gaze from the setting sun to this blue mountain, I wondered whether it was standing there alone or was a part of a chain of mountains lying beyond. As Chozo and I began moving gradually northward, walking side by side, I could not escape the feeling that the mountains stretched out endlessly beyond this one mountain I could see forever me, and all these mountains continued on the north in an unbroken chain. I suppose you could say that this was because the mountain appeared to be retreating before us step by step, since walking towards the mountain resulted only in our walking towards the mountain and it didn't bring our feet any closer to its base. You could also explain it this way: as the sun sank lower and lower, the upper edge of the shaded side of the blue mountain and the lower edge of the blue sky forgot their proper places and began to invade each other's territory. Soon I could no longer distinguish between the two, and when I shifted my eyes from the mountains to the sky, I lost any conscious sense of their having left the mountain, and saw the sky as a continuation of the mountain. And the sky was huge, and it stretched northward without limit, and Chozo and I were walking north. Ever since I had tucked up the skirts of my kimono at the Senju Bridge on the edge of the city the night before after leaving Tokyo, I had forged onward with bare shanks, whether plunging into the bends of pines, sitting at the tea stand, or taking the train, and still I had felt almost hot. Since entering this town, however, I had begun to feel somewhat cold with my legs bare. More than cold, I had probably begun to feel lonely. Silent and moving nothing but our legs, it seems as if Chozo and I were making our way straight through the middle of autumn. Then I got hungry again, and I know it doesn't look good for me to keep writing about my empty stomach, and in particularly unpoetic in this context, but that can't be helped. I really got hungry. All I had been doing since leaving the house was walk, never eating any normal human food, as a result which my stomach would become empty all of a sudden. However bad you may feel, however great your anguish, however convinced you may be that your soul is trying to escape, your stomach empties itself out just fine. Or rather, it might be more appropriate to say that in order to keep your soul in place, you have to eat. You have to provide it with food. Undignified as this may sound, I traversed the length of that long narrow town, walking in the middle of the street with Chozo, swinging my head back and forth, looking into all these eating places on either side. And there were lots of them. Forget about the high-class inns and restaurants. Everywhere I could see these plain old eateries that would be fine for Chozo and me, but he didn't look ready to go into any of them. He didn't ask me, "Want to eat?" the way he had asked me if I wanted to make the omnibus before. Still, he He was obviously looking back and forth from side to side just like me, as if he were trying to find something. Firm in my belief that at any moment Chozo was going to find a good place and take me inside for supper, I patiently endured my hunger, walking ever northward through the long, long town. Now, it's true I was hungry, but not so hungry that I was about to collapse. I could tell there was little manju left in my stomach from before. I could walk if I had to. It was just that my sinking spirit had awakened with a start the moment it had hurled into the middle of the straight street upon leaving the train, at which point the chilly air of the mountain village assaulted my skin through the rays of the setting sun, giving rise to a mental turnabout that resulted in a sudden rise for something to eat. I could get by without eating if I had to. My hunger wasn't so bad that I was willing to ask Chozo to feed me. Probably my mouth needed something to chew on, and that made it hard for me to ignore the restaurant signs. When I saw Chozo was looking into the shops on both sides as if he had the same thing in mind, my hunger grew worse. In passing through this long narrow town, I counted 9 eateries that looked right for me and Chozo. When I reached the ninth, I realized that for all its length, the town was about to come to an end, and another 100 yards and we'll be through it. I was beginning to feel a tremendous letdown when I spotted one more sign on the left, drinks/eats. This is it, I thought, my last chance. Perhaps the thought was responsible for the intensity with which the thick letters on the shoji beneath the sooty eaves burned themselves into my mind. Drink/eats snacks. And I can see each word now indelibly etched into my brain. Drinks, eats, snacks. Whatever senility may lie in store for me, I know that I shall never lose the ability to write these 3 words exactly as I saw them then. Incredibly, my own lingering glances at my last chance for drinks, eats, snacks were matched by Chozo's concentrated gaze at the shoji. At last, I thought, even the unyielding Chozo will go in for a bite to eat. But he did not go in. On the other hand, he did come to a sudden stop. Beyond the shoji, I saw something red moving. Judging from the expression on Chozo's face, he seemed to be staring at this red thing. Yes, the red thing was a human being. I had no idea why Chozo had stopped to stare at this red human being. It was undoubtedly human, but its features were entirely obscure. It was just this gloomy red thing. I too stopped to marvel at this phenomenon when a red blanket came flying through the shoji door. There may be some readers who feel that a blanket should not have been necessary in May. However, deep in the mountains, this town might have been, but the fact is that this fellow had himself wrapped tightly in a red blanket. On the other hand, the only thing he had on underneath was a hand-woven summer kimono, which meant that he wasn't wearing much more clothing than I was. Of course, I discovered only later that he was making do with a single unlined kimono. At the time he came flying out through the shoji, he was just red. Chozo walked up to this red fellow and said, "Hey kid, want a job?" Since want a job was the first question Chozo had asked me, I thought, there he goes again, putting somebody to work. And I observed 2 of them with considerable interest. This was when I realized clearly for the first time that Chozo was a man who would approach anyone he judged to be suitable young fellow and ask, "Hey, want a job?" It was simply his business to find work for others. He was not recommending me to be a miner because he found me uniquely qualified for the position. He was probably capable of tirelessly repeating, "Hey, want a job?" in the same mechanical tone of a voice to anyone, anywhere. Come to think of it, it was amazing he could continue in this line of work year after year. Not even Chozo could have been born with a natural gift for asking people, "Hey, want a job?" like anyone else. He must have been repeating himself by force of circumstances. Viewed in this way, he was a perfectly innocent individual. He pursued this work because he didn't know how to do anything else, but he gave no sign of anguish at his lack of ability. Indeed, he performed his chosen task with the confident air of a man convinced that there was no one else in the whole wide world, who could be capable of asking, Hey, want a job? It would have been fun if I had been able to formulate such replete theory of Chozo back then, but having nearly been deserted by my soul, I could not have attained the necessary degree of detachment. No, my theory of Chozo had just begun taking shape now for the first time, while I looked back at myself as a stranger and set down this recollection of my youth here on paper. It existed only on paper, and I suspect it's very different from any theory of Chozo I had back then. As I stood there listening to Chozo and the red blanket, I realized that Chozo took absolutely no cognizance of my individuality. Yes, I know it's a little funny for me to bring up the question of individuality at this point, and that a ridiculous contradiction is involved when someone who just ran away from Tokyo and sunk to the depth of becoming a minor starts insisting on his individuality. I almost burst out laughing when I wrote the word here. I am in far better position now than I was then, if I can feel like laughing when I look back at my past. Back then, laughing was the last thing I wanted to do. Clearly, Chozo did not recognize my individuality. By which I mean that he had buttonholed this young fellow who had come flying out of the eatery and was urging him to become a miner, as if the red blanket was simply another me, using the exact same tone, the same attitude, the same words, and I think I may presume to say the same degree of enthusiasm. Somehow I found this a little insulting. An explanation for this would roughly go as follows. Not even I, who at the time had placed my common sense in a hock, could go along with Chozo's claim that being a miner was a wonderful profession. I knew full well that the miner ranked only below the ox and the horse among beasts of burden, and that was no honor for me to become one. I may have been thinking that I was the only candidate for a miner, but I had enough common sense to know that it was nothing for me to get worked up about when another one suddenly materialized from the door of a tavern in the form of a red blanket. But when I saw that he and I were being treated in the exactly same manner, I felt not so much annoyed that the manner was the same as persuaded that he and I were the same person. I had arrived at the odd conclusion that if the manner of treatment were the same, those receiving the manner of the treatment must be the same. I seemed to have stumbled on that one. Chozo was now offering a job to the red blanket, and the red blanket was me. I couldn't believe that some other person was standing there with a red blanket on. My soul has abandoned me, flown into the red blanket, and was being urged by Chozo to become a miner. This started me feeling sorry for myself. As long as I was dealing directly with Chozo, I could forget my individuality. But how pitiful to stand aside and watch myself as the red blanket, being promised by Chozo that I would make lots of money. I looked hard at the red blanket and with some disappointment thought, so this is the real me. But what really struck me as odd was that the red blanket gave Chozo the same kind of answer that I had. This young man was the same human being as myself, not just in the red blanket that he had on, but down to the very bottom of his heart. I didn't like this one bit. Another thing that bothered me was Chozo's disgustingly impartial manner. He gave no hint whatever that I was more suited to being a miner than the red blanket was. His approach was absolutely mechanical to the point where I began to feel that I deserved at least a little special treatment as the one who had come first. This just goes on to show what a stubborn thing human vanity is. Here I was in such desperate circumstances that I was on the verge of becoming a miner, and still I was vain enough to be bothered by something so trivial. This was probably the same sort of phenomenon as honor among thieves or courtesy among beggars. I was a lot less bothered by this affront to my vanity, though, than by my realization that the red blanket and I were one and the same. The two quickly wound up their business as I stood there blankly, watching in annoyance. Not that Chozo was so clever, the red blanket was a fool. I don't mean to dismiss him as a fool by the way of contrasting him to myself. In my readiness to go with Chozo in the East With each, I agreed to become a miner, and in all sorts of other ways, I was just as much as a fool as this young man. If I had come up with a difference about the only one I could name would be that he wore a red blanket, and I had on my blue and white lined kimono. When I call him a fool, I mean it in the only sense that he was just as pitiful as a creature as I was, and implying the sympathy of one fool for another. And so it came about that Chozo headed for the copper mine with two fools in a tow. The moment I started walking next to the red blanket, though, I noticed that my feeling of annoyance had disappeared. Human thoughts are the most changeable thing in the world. The minute you are happy to have one, it's gone. The second you are pleased to be free of one, it's back. Maybe a thought is there, maybe it isn't. You can't put your finger on it for sure. Once I was staying at a hot spring, bored, and I borrowed a book from the inn and found it contained a bunch of nonsense from the Buddhist scriptures. One phrase struck me though. The mind is unknowable in three worlds. The three worlds business is a lot of hot air, but I think the part about the mind being unknowable is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. True, one person I told this to said I was talking about ideas, not the mind. I didn't contradict him, since you can call it anything you like. Disputes of this sort are absolutely pointless. They arise because there are lots of people around who are very clever, but who don't know the first thing about human heart. It frustrates me the way they think that it's just because it's a solid object, the heart stays the same, as long as the worms don't eat it, year in and year out. And the shocking thing is that they openly manipulate other people any way they see fit, educate them, and make them behave according to their own wishes, all based on this cheerful misconception. They don't realize that the water never comes back once it's flowed away. While you are dilly-dallying, it evaporates. In any case, you only need to remember here that my earlier annoyance had evaporated by the time I started walking with this red blanket. I was shocked to find myself actually pleased to be walking next to him. On the other hand, this fellow was a real bumpkin from Ibaraki or thereabouts. His pronunciation was funny, as though the words were escaping from his nose. He pronounced potato as potato, and that belongs to a later anecdote. When we first started walking together, I wasn't too thrilled with the noises he made, and his face was not fully formed. By comparison, Chozo, with his square jaw and thick lips, was a man of regal presence. In addition, the boy had been running around all his life in the fields of Ibaraki, had never set a foot in Tokyo, and his red blanket had a funny stink about it. Still, I was happy to have found a companion in this mountain village who would go with me to the mine. I was aiming to bury myself, but I preferred to be buried with a company rather than alone. Going to ruin by yourself is far lonelier than going to ruin with someone else. Rude though it is of me to say this, I didn't like the one thing about the fellow, but I was tremendously pleased and grateful that he would be going to the ruin with me. All it took was a few words between us, and we started walking to draw us close together, which leads me to suspect that if I were drowning in a river, I would probably want to drag a boatman or two down with me. And if it turned out that I had to go to some kind of hell when I died, I would probably choose a hell with demons over ones where there was nobody besides me. In this way, I suddenly found myself liking the red blanket, and after walking a couple hundred yards, I noticed that I was hungry again. It may sound as if I was constantly getting hungry, but this was just a continuation of the earlier hunger, not a new one. To review the order of events, first, my spirit had become diffused, and I had left the train with my sense of present reality was at its weakest. Then I had looked straight down the straight road to the mountain at the far end of the town and finally returned to normal. This had led me to my feeling of hunger, then my awareness that my individuality was being ignored, and a strong accompanying feeling of annoyance, which had been followed immediately by the advent of a companion in mining and a partial recovery of my declining energies. This explanation should help you to grasp the sequence resulting in my return to hunger. end. It's a little bit awkward, but I'm ending the reading here today. It's 8 more minutes to 2 hours, but I don't think I think this is a good place to end because that's yeah, that's just. And the funny thing is, this is exactly where I planned to end earlier when I was like, kind of like going through it and see where can I end the book. Turns out my calculation is about right. It really does took about 2 hours to get here. Yeah, I went from page. So the book started on page 27. Now it's page 79. So it's a good place to end it, I think, for now. And yeah, it's almost 2 hours of reading. That's my calculation. That's my guess. That I don't know. I think I had a pretty good guesstimation when it comes to like how many pages I can do in 2 hours time, and I think this is pretty accurate. That's exactly where I plan to pause. There's no chapters. I just keep reading. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough read. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I can probably. I don't want to read more than 2 hours because sometimes when I do, it just that kind of throws me off a little bit on how I feel about the book. I've I have I've seen people who didn't like um, didn't like me reading the Spring Snow by Yukio Mishima because I very obviously do not enjoy um, Spring Snow. But I was also reading like 3 4 hours of Spring Snow at the same time, so I kind of like um, too much. I think Spring Snow is a book that you need to like really take your time to read it, uh, and not rush through it. I definitely rushed through Spring Snow. I didn't quite enjoy the book. Didn't like the book. Um, didn't I don't quite like Yukio Mishima's writing. So, um, and somebody took offense of that in the comment section. It was quite funny. Um, anyway, um, interesting. It's very Natsume Sōseki, the minor. Um, a lot of rambling, very Natsume Sōseki. Yeah, yep. A lot of like train of thoughts thing, right? It just goes on and on and on and on. Um, it's almost unstoppable. I didn't like it. There's no place in time in it where I could have like I just there's just no space basically. Um, where I could like find myself like, oh, I can take a break. I can take a short break here. I can like drink a sip of tea here. Just none. Yeah. By the way, Ando, I saw you earlier. Thank you for being here, Ando. I saw you. It's just that like the book when you start it. It's just very hard to stop and say hi, because it's like so detailed. There's so much rambling. It's so Natsume Sōseki. Exactly what I like about his writing is that he just goes on and on and on, basically. Yeah. Um, cool. Uh, yeah, my room is pretty much the same all this while. Yeah, I think I need to. God damn. someone spammed my chat just now, and I was panicking, so I didn't know. I forgot how to I forgot how to delete people's comments. Turns out that you don't really. I don't do that because usually my moderator would do that for me, but my moderator is not here. I'm alone. And then I realized that the way you delete spam messages to ban them completely. I should have learned that. Anyways, I don't know if anyone is here, but um, thank you for being here for sure. Uh, thank you for listening, and I'm gonna port this over to my YouTube. I don't know if anyone actually enjoys Natsume Sōseki as much as I do, but I'm just glad to be doing this. I like reading. That's all. Sorry for stumbling on words, stumbling on sentences, stumbling on the dotera non-stop. There's a lot of like whenever there's a lot of like the it, I always like stumble over them. It's very common. I have a short tongue, unfortunately. But yeah. But anyways, thank you for hanging out with me today, whoever who's here. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna go off now and gonna chill for the rest of my day. I'm gonna just like hang out and doom scroll or I don't know, stay in game and do random shit. I don't know. We'll see. I would love to, yeah, just chill. Basically, it's my off day. Anyways, thank you so much, guys, for listening to me. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for always being here with me. I'm gonna go now. Yeah, I just spent like the entire 2 hour reading the minor, and he's not even a minor yet. Funny. Anyways, thank you so much. I'm gonna go now. Bye bye. Ando, I know you're here. I don't know if you're still here, but thank you for dropping by just now. I'm so sorry I didn't say hi. Um, it's very difficult when I'm reading halfway. Anyways, thank you so much. I'm gonna go now. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Bye bye. I'm gonna go and just rest. Bye bye. Thanks for listening. As always. Bye.